So we're back working on my MGBGT Autocrosser here, and my cylinder head is not back from the machine shop yet, so we can't work on the engine right now. But that's okay, because we got plenty of other things to work on yet. One thing I have been working on off camera is trying to get my front spoiler repaired and mounted back on the car again. Last time I went autocrossing about 3 years ago now, wow, it's been that long, I ripped it off of there, trying to load it back on the trailer by myself, and it caught on the ramps because the angle of the trailer just wasn't quite right. It's been sitting in my shed ever since, and it's time to get this thing back on now that we're actually working on this thing. But that's not what this video is about. What we're going to be looking at today is inside this box. Now, whenever I was working on this thing in the past and autocrossing, I was working on pretty much a non-existent budget. Other than putting an engine together because I needed an engine or it wasn't going to run way back then, I didn't put any money into it. It was all just my ingenuity and time and building things and modifying things and just making it work. Well, I'm not quite as broke as I was then, and I don't have quite as much time to sit and work everything out. So I got a coilover conversion kit for the front suspension. This one is the fast road kit, which means the springs are a little bit stiffer than the stock springs, which this thing's always been on stock springs up till now. So I'm going to be kind of back to square one, setting the suspension up, but that's all part of it. So we've got these are going to be upper A-arms. Get to the we got lower spring pans. And here we are. GAZ, single adjustable shocks on a spring, coilover spring. So this will allow me to be able to fully adjust the right height of the car and get the balance that I'm looking for. And because it takes a lot of time to set one of these things up and play with different springs, spacers, and all that stuff and get what you want otherwise. Now, is this legal for street prepared class? I didn't even look. I did not even look at the rule book. I don't care. These cars are so far behind the curve anymore. We're trying to run against so much newer cars that it's almost impossible to truly be competitive, try to run for points championship or anything anymore in any class except for the vintage class, which my region won't run. So I'm now just building whatever I want, and they can put me wherever they want to put me. If they won't let me run F-Street Prepared, then they can put me in modified. If they do let me run Street Prepared, they would probably just take my points away if I beat out somebody who's actually running for a championship, and I'm cool with that because I probably won't be running a full schedule anyway. I'm just out there trying to actually have fun with my car again and see how far I can take it, how fast I can make it within a budget that makes sense for me. So now that we know what we have here, let's start digging in and taking that thing apart. So before we actually start tearing into the car, let's take a closer look at what's in the kit. Of course, we got the coilovers here, got the lower spring pans, all the hardware, got urethane bushings for the upper and lower A-arms, and then we got basically new upper A-arms that are going to encompass these blocks, shafts, all of this, and some of the hardware here to actually replace the the shock and upper A-arm combo that comes on the cars from the factory. And we have instructions, of course. So these kits, they sell for about 1,200 bucks, something like that. I hope for me it'll be money well spent. We'll find out. So in order to install that kit, you basically got to start with taking the front cross member out and dropping the whole front suspension out. Now that's a whole lot easier to do when you have the engine in place, which obviously I don't. So what I've done was I've made sure my rearmost jack stands are all the way behind the axle. Then I'm going to stack some weight in here. I've got a cement block, that old cracked cylinder head from the white GT I worked on, and then I got a bag of gravel, and if that's not enough, I've got other cylinder heads and stuff laying around. We can just keep stacking on here until we got enough weight that we can compress the springs to get them apart. Because you do want to compress the springs and get them apart while you have the weight of the vehicle to help you. Don't just take it out and then try to take it apart. So as part of doing this on basically no budget in the past, rather than buying new lug nuts that were open and lighter weight, because it's rotating mass and unsprung weight, I turned my lug nuts on the lathe to take a little bit off of them, save some weight. And I made my own spacers out of aluminum because I used to have a rub on the right rear, so I had spacers in the rear to get that to stop rubbing, and then I spaced out the front to get the front width the same as the rear. So as far as tearing this down, it's all going to be pretty standard stuff, as if you're doing any other suspension work or even brakes for that matter. Except for taking the stuff behind the rotor apart. We're going to get the caliper off of here, and yes, I do run green stuff pads. And I've drilled and slotted rotors, and my hubs have all been turned on the lathe to clean them up and get rid of all the excess casting and the lopsidedness. These things had a tendency to be slightly cast off center and can create slight vibrations, and I trued them all up on a lathe. But that also gets rid of a tiny bit of rotating mass and unsprung weight. So we got to get the sway bar off, tie rod's loose, and then we jack it up from the bottom, take tension off the spring, and take the upper trunnion pin out on both sides. And that takes the spring weight. Then when you get the spring out without it flying around or having any problems, because if you do it when it's off the car, it's a lot harder to do. And I always install them the other way around too, is get the weight of the car, put the crossmember back in, get the weight of the car to help you jack it up and bolt everything back together. Don't sit and try to do it on the workbench. So aside from dealing with stuck bolts, it really is that easy if you do it right. So now what I'll do is I'll take this bolt out here. The other alternative is you could take the bottom one out, let it loose, then take the top one out. Then this won't swing like it did on me there. Of course, if you had somebody with you, they can help hold that too. So then we'll do the same on the other side. Then I can disconnect the steering shaft, start taking the bolts out of the cross member, and get the brake line out of the clips there, and we're ready to drop this thing out of here. right, well, I was trying to give a bit of a tutorial on how to take that out, and I screwed up and left the camera on time lapse. So, yay. As you can see, that's only got one screw in it currently. So there's the crossmember out. To go back and talk about what I was saying before, is they have these special studs, double-ended studs with a taper here that go through there and hold the crossmember in. The easy way to do it is, if these bolts will come out, which I've got one that is stuck forever and is never going to come out, is you can just take the nuts off here, pop them. Don't hit them too hard or too many times. If you can pop them and they pop out, good. That makes it really easy. Otherwise, you got to get in through the bottom of the crossmember and take out the nut on the bottom, which that's what a lot of people prefer to do anyway. But in my case, as part of the lightening procedure of lightening my crossmember, I actually have extra holes in here that have been drilled for me to easily get to them and take the nuts off the bottom if I need to, which obviously on this one corner I do because that won't come out. My crossmember has been lightened actually quite a bit. All this stuff here and the spring pans, and anybody who's actually been paying attention will notice a lot of little things I've done within the suspension, and you'll see more as we go. So the other thing you missed me explaining in what ended up being a time lapse instead was to mark the steering shaft where the joint here is, the separation of joint. Make sure you take the bolt completely out. Don't just loosen it. And then drive a little bit of a wedge in there to spread that a little bit to make it easy to slide off. And don't forget to take the brake line out of the clips on the back of the crossmember so you don't pull the brake line down. So at this point now, I've got to strip this completely down, get the shocks off of it, the rack, and the lower A-arms. Unfortunately, I put these shocks on here about 5,000 miles ago as rebuilt shocks, and now I'm taking them off. Well, some customer of mine will get a deal on a set of shocks that are gently used. So yes, I did pretty much lighten everything on my car. I got the spacers drilled out. I got the bump stops drilled out. Crossmember's got holes here. Brackets have holes. These have been ground a little bit. And we got all the holes through here. Just trying to get rid of a little bit of weight and make this thing a little faster. So now that I got all the gunk cleaned off my crossmember here, it's time to start doing the modifications. Now they give you a plate here that you're meant to bolt on through here from the back side. So you put it on the back side here, bolt that on, and then you drill with an 1/8 inch drill that they supply through all of these holes. Then you unbolt the plate and then go back through all of those with a 1/4 inch drill bit that they supply in the kit. And then you take a chisel, knock that out, and then go in with a file or a die grinder and clean that hole out. Now that's worked perfectly fine, but you do have to be careful because there is weld all the way around this. Now this is a 2-inch hole here, and you're going to end up with a 2-inch hole, so it should exactly match this. The thing is as you're drilling through there and you're going through that weld, you're drilling up through weld at a bit of an angle, and it's pretty easy to break a drill bit going through like that. So you have to take it slow and easy and be careful. Now I just happen to have a 2-inch hole saw here, a whole box of hole saws that I rarely ever use, most of which I didn't even buy myself. They came from my dad or other places. So I also have a drill press. So for me, I'm thinking the way I'm going to go about it is I just use my hole saw. Now what you can do is you take the hole saw and you can set the depth of the pilot just so that you can come through here, get some engagement into this, and then hit it to where you get a nice drill mark in the center. Then take your drill and drill that out for the pilot. Then you can come back through, set it up, and just drill through this way. And I'll drill through until I get into the weld. And then I flip it back over and just finish basically just cutting the weld out and knocking it through on this side. I've already done this side here. It worked out just fine. And it makes for a nice clean hole that really takes no cleanup at all. So you're not going to sit and mess around with a bunch of filing and stuff. But whenever you're drilling through or cutting through weld with hole saws or anything, you can expect it to put a lot of wear on the hole saw or the drill bit, because weld is pretty hard and your hole saw may or may not be all that useful afterwards. But in this case, like I said, I don't think I actually went and bought this, so I'm going to sacrifice it. Well, it is now the next day, and I've got the crossmember all cleaned up, and I put a coat of paint on it, let it dry overnight before I decided to start messing with it anymore. What I tend to do with my car is anytime I got something like this off of it, I go ahead and I clean it up. I will usually also go over it, knock off any sharp edges, weld splatter, casting flashing if it's a cast part, kind of smooth some edges, round some things off, and that way, and then paint it. That way the part looks a whole lot cleaner and nicer when I go to put it back in. And I went ahead and threw this in the blast cabinet too. Usually I do all that. That way I know there's no rust festering anywhere, and if there's no layers of crud and extra layers of paint, then I know that the part doesn't weigh any more than it actually has to weigh. You knew that that had to be at least part of it with me. But at any rate, so like I said, this thing has been lightened just a little bit. I didn't go super crazy, nowhere near Alpe's level, because this still is primarily a street car that I don't race nearly often enough. But like the brackets for the brake hoses, they're only holding brake hoses, so you can drill those. I went ahead and drilled a few holes in here. I've cleaned up some of these brackets just a little bit. I did not touch the mounts for the steering rack though. Leave those alone. And what I've done was I've just connected the holes here and make slots out of them, and added these holes here because that makes it a lot easier to get into these bolts, or to put the nuts on there to bolt the crossmember back into the car. And the other reason why I don't lighten this stuff too much, because this is something that's low in the car. I don't mind a little extra weight low in the car because that helps the center of gravity. If you start taking a lot of weight out of things like this, it actually raises the center of gravity of the car by just, you know, fractions of an inch, but, you know, the higher it is, the harder it's going to be to make the car handle right. Now I did go ahead and drill out my bump stop spacers, and I've actually drilled my bump stops too as well. I know, like I said before, it's a sickness. And some of you might think I'm crazy for drilling these out and for what little weight that's going to save. And you know what? If you think I'm crazy, I'm perfectly fine with that. As a matter of fact, I'll wear that as a badge of honor. Because that means I'm doing stuff that most people don't dare to do and or are afraid to do. But also, if any of my competitors think I'm crazy for doing things like this, then I've got a leg up on them. Because I'm willing to do the 100 little things like this that add up, that don't seem like much, that eventually add up to something to give myself the competitive advantage over people who thinks this is a waste of time. If you want to go fast on a low budget, which I've always been on nearly no budget, you got to put the time and effort in. Because it either takes money or time and effort. And money is no guarantee that you're going to go fast. Well, time and effort necessarily isn't either, but the more you learn, the more time and effort you put into your car, and the more you learn about how to drive it, the less of an advantage the people who are just spending cubic dollars have over you. And sometimes you can go out there and beat those guys with little money. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting this together. I'm going to go ahead and put the bump stops on, get them on there, and then we'll start looking at how this thing goes together. So the reason we have to cut these holes in here is for this extended portion of the shock to stick through here and connect onto where the A-arm pivot is. So this here will actually go through there and go through these aluminum blocks here, and then the A-arms will go on the end of that. So they give us these aluminum blocks here, and they mark them right and left. And what they do is you put the right one on the right side as you're looking at it, and the left one on the left side as you're looking at it on both sides, not right side and left side. Now, as I go to start assembling all of this, I am just going to I'm not going to be putting the thread locker on it that they provide in the kit until I get everything kind of put together and mocked up, because I don't know how long it's going to take me with filming it and everything. And I'll probably come back later when I'm ready to tighten everything down, pull them out one by one, put the thread locker on, then put them in and tighten everything down. I've got all my hardware laid out here. That way I could go through, make sure everything was there, account for everything, and put them all in the pairs, like in pairs that they're supposed to be together. Now they give you these upper A-arms here. One's threaded and one's not on each side. And of course the threaded port goes to the rear, just like when you're assembling your regular suspension, you want the nut always to the rear because it's less likely to fall out if you lose the nut. They give you these Super Pro bushings here. And these bushings can be a little bit of a bear to put in if you're trying to just do them by hand. It's much better to use your bench vise if you have one, because they don't like to slide through the second bushing very well at all. But with the pressure of that, it goes right through. And they do provide a silicone grease you put on these. Use that from the kit. Well, all the urethane bushings should have a silicone grease on them. And actually I have a Teflon grease here that I usually use for that. That's really, I really like for these, because that stuff does not wash away. You put it on, you come back 10 years later, it's still gonna be there. So we got these plates, and we got these plates here, and these are not exactly drilled square, because if you don't realize it, the shocks on your MGB are not a square hole pattern. There is an offset to the one side. That's why these blocks are lefts and rights. And these plates can only go on one way. So we start out by putting that on there. We'll run them things down, which I don't know why they're not running down so easily. Must be some crap in the threads from the blast cabinet, or some paint from where I painted it. So we'll run those down just till they're finger tight, because we still want to be able to put this through there. But we got to put this through there with the shock in place. So you got to put the shock up through there. And run this through, and there's little flats here that get put on, that go through there, and then the set screws go on and hold that. And then we do this on both sides, and that's our starting point. So now normally I wouldn't do any suspension assembly on the workbench here. I would put the crossmember up in the car bare, and then assemble everything then, because it's a lot easier to get the crossmember in when it's bare. But for the sake of being able to film it easier, I'm going to at least do the first portion on the workbench here. I did go ahead and take this back off, chased all the threads. Now everything goes in nice and easy like it should. So what we want to do is we want to get this pretty much even. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're not going to tighten these things down yet. We're just going to take them down until they touch and are somewhat snug. And once we bolt on our A-arms here, get everything tight, that'll pretty much self-center, then you can finish tightening everything. So we got the threaded one goes towards the back of the car, and the non-threaded one towards the front of the car. Then there's washers, and then they give you these lock nuts to put on here, which we'll tighten here a little bit later. But then there's a spacer that goes through here, just like with the shock on the MGBs, where they come together and have that bolt going through there. This pretty much does the same thing and sets the spacing here at the top. So we'll do that on both sides here, and what I'll do is I'll take all these things down to where everything's kind of snug but not tight yet, and kind of in position, and then we'll go ahead and put this in the car and go from there. One little thing to note about this kit is every bolt and nut on this kit that isn't screwing into a existing threaded hole on the car is metric. So you're going to need both SAE and metric tools to do this. So these will be SAE 9/16, these will be all metric stuff here, and everything else. Actually, I think these aren't metric, because they have to go through the bushings. But you'll need both sets of tools. And one other little interesting tidbit is these are adjustable shocks. They have knobs down here to adjust them. They're single way adjustables. they tell you to adjust them to 20 clicks to the right as the initial adjustment. And 20 clicks is all there is. So you're basically setting it to full hard as the initial setting. I felt that was a little on the odd side. I would have thought they'd have put it in the middle. So one of the other things we got to look at is the original spring pans. Yes, they've been lightened. Need to come out, and these spring pans have got to go in to actually hold the bottom of the shock, which is just as simple as just taking, these 3 bolts and this off, putting that in, and replacing it with the hardware they give you. All right, well, I wasn't going to take it this far before putting it in the car, and I went ahead and once I put the spring pans in, I went ahead and just threw the lower A-arms on before I put it in the car. So this is basically the front suspension before you put the kingpins and everything in. So now I just got to get this bolted back into the car and we can continue. So actually one other big reason why I didn't put any of the Loctite on any of the bolts yet is because I wanted you to be able to see how this thing went together on the workbench. But I need to take it about halfway back apart because I cannot put these bolts in. Since I took them all the way out, I can't get in there to put this nut on or to put this in there with it fully assembled because the shock itself gets in the way. So off camera, I'll be taking this thing back apart so that I can bolt the cross member in properly and then be putting it back together to this point again. So as it turns out, I did not have to tear the whole suspension apart to put that last stud in there. Once I swung the spring pan down, I was able to swing the shock out just enough to get in there, to put the one bolt in the one side and the nut, and then everything on the other side here. So that was a good thing. So now I'm going to have to put the rotor, upright and rotor back in place. So now I need to go through and actually tighten everything down and pull all these out one by one, put the Loctite on them, all that stuff. But that's about as far as I'm going to be able to actually take this thing for now, because I'm probably going to be taking my steering column out and working on it, which means the rack's not going to be in it for a little while yet. And of course, the engine's not quite ready to drop in, so I can't set it on the ground yet and check ride height or any of that. Now they do provide upper bushings for the top of the kingpin and a spacer and everything, but I don't think I'm going to be using them on this case because I've got camber adjustment bushings in there now, so you can twist them and change the camber, and I want to stay with those.